Oh, I marched to the Battle of New Orleans at the end of the early British wars. The young land started growing, the young blood started flowing, but I ain't a-marching anymore.
The 60s were a unique period of history, a time of hope, freedom, humor, and revolution. Roots of liberalism planted in the generation after World War II took hold when they came of age in the 60s. These youth went against the established institutions and stood up for their own ideas, protesting the escalating Vietnam War and following in the footsteps of flourishing social reform movements, such as the Black Panthers. Most notably, they tried to decrease governmental control over their own lives. This ranged from ideas like civil rights reform to full-blown anarchism and hippieism. However, there was a distinct separation between the protest groups, such as Students for a Democratic Society, and the peace and humor-loving hippies. The most successful organization to combine hippie and anti-war ideas was the Youth International Front, commonly known as the Yippies. By using tactics such as guerrilla theater, political pranksterism, civil disobedience, and media manipulation, the Yippies effectively stood up for political leftism based on jocular activism and unorthodox demonstrations. Many of the ideas of the Yippies were originally rooted in other organizations, such as the Diggers, one of the first groups to effectively combine hippieism with activism and guerrilla theater. However, the Diggers were mainly a sectional organization, based in the San Francisco Bay Area. In addition, the Diggers would come to discourage the type of media manipulation and the apparently hierarchical structure of the Yippies. Another group from which the Yippies arose was the Vietnam Day Committee. This was a grassroots organization founded by Jerry Rubin, future founder of the Yippies, to protest the Vietnam War. Many of the future Yips would get their political start with the VDC. The Yippies were officially founded at a New Year's Eve party at the end of 1967 by Jerry Rubin, Abbie Hoffman, and Paul Krasner. All three had protested together, often in ways that are characteristic of the Yippies, and will later be called Yippie activities, but this is the official founding and naming of the group. According to Paul Krasner's account, he came up with the name Yippie randomly, and the words Youth International Party would come to follow. Their agenda was clear. They would combine hippie ideas with protests, use outrageous demonstrations to get media attention, and thus spread the word to, as Hoffman called them, the 16-year-old runaways of America. And lastly, stand up for the liberalism permeating the nation. However, even before the official founding of the Yippies, there have been demonstrations that will later be labeled. Jerry Rubin pulled one of the first when he was called in from the House Un-American Activities Committee and showed up in a Revolutionary War outfit, complete with wig and musket. This is the first major jocular protest to gain national media attention, but this was only the beginning of Yippie humor. On August 24, 1967, Jerry Rubin, Abbie Hoffman, Stu Albert, and other supporters entered the New York Stock Exchange observation balcony. When the guard told Hoffman that they couldn't enter since they were just dirty hippies and wanted to protest, Hoffman replied, quote, "We're not hippies, we're Jews, and we want to see the stock exchange." Once they were in the balcony overlooking the NYSE floor, they threw handfuls of dollar bills over the side and watched as the stockbrokers scrambled for the falling money, grabbing and often fighting with one another. As Hoffman would come to say, quote, "It was no different from what they were doing before." Later that year, on October 21st, Yippies Allen Ginsberg, Jerry Rubin, Abbie Hoffman, and 100,000 supporters marched in Washington, D.C. from the Lincoln Monument to the Pentagon. There they held a massive protest and sit-in to stand against the war and for peace and love, with an organized effort to try to levitate the Pentagon, while Ed Sanders, lead singer of the Fugs, tried to exorcise the building. Many of the soldiers even came over to join the hippies and helped to put daisies in the barrels of the guns being pointed at them. The main turning point and most widely known protest for the Yippies came in 1968 with the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. The Yippies celebrated a so-called Festival of Life in stark contrast to what they deemed DNC's Convention of Death. During the week, the Yippies sarcastically nominated a pig for president, naming him Pegasus the Immortal, with the slogan, "They nominate a president and he eats the people. We nominate a president and the people eat him." Over the next week, the Yippies would protest using many different tactics, demanding that Chicago pay them $1 million to leave the city, threatening to release LSD into the city's water supply, and peaceful marches, many of which ended in awful police brutality. Chicago police put into effect an 11 o'clock curfew and cited many protesters for violating it as they slept in the park. They also called into effect the Anti-Riot Act to try to stop protests. On August 26th, Yippie Tom Hayden was arrested for letting the air out of a police car's tires, and 2 days later, Hoffman was arrested for displaying free speech and having fuck written across his forehead. On March 20th of the next year, 8 protesters were indicted by a grand jury for inciting a riot and conspiracy. These 8 included 2 of the most notable Yippies, Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin. Throughout the trial, they made mockeries of the process by calling Arlo Guthrie to the stand and having him give his famous anti-war song, Alice's Restaurant, as testimony, showing up in judicial robes, telling the judge that he should try LSD and that Hoffman could get some for him. One of the 8 was separated from the group trial, and 5 of the Chicago 7, as they came to be called, were eventually convicted of breaking the Anti-Riot Act. But all charges were dropped in a 1972 National Appeals Court. After Chicago, the Yippies were still active. In 1970, Stu Albert ran for sheriff of Alameda County, California. He had been in jail for 65 days previously, where he had witnessed firsthand the brutality of the jails, including, quote, seeing guys hit over the head with chairs while they dined on breakfast, rapes, and attempted suicides. He decided to run for sheriff, according to him, to get revenge for, quote, getting sprayed with hot painful chemicals as a welcome to prison health measure. He carried 65,000 votes, but failed to win the election. The last major Yippie action was the Yippienta Act in 1972 Florida. The Yippies gathered in Miami to protest the Republican National Convention, with hopes of more success than in Chicago. One of the major problems they had was the elderly residents' fear that the Yippies would cause disorder and chaos. However, after Stu Albert spoke at a senior citizens meeting, both groups found that they had a common enemy in the RNC and cooperated, protesting the convention together, standing up for their political views, as well as hippie-like recreation. During the week of the RNC, a new group emerged, calling themselves the Yippies, led by Dana Beal. The Yippies saw them as an unorganized movement causing uncontrolled chaos. After the dissolution of the Yippies, later in 1972, the Yippies took their name and called themselves the Youth International Party. Yippie Sam Left maintains that, quote, the similarity is in name only. In contrast, Stu Albert puts forth that the Yippies may have been a mere adaptation of the Yippie philosophy to the times. There are a few present-day products of the Yippies as well. Many of the old Yips consider Michael Moore to hold the jocular liberalism that the Yippies valued, if in a less revolutionary way. Stu Albert points to Jon Stewart, and that he can effectively manipulate the media and use humor to grab attention and display politics, much the way the Yippies did. Robert Greenwald, director of Steal This Movie, said about Abby Hoffman that he is, quote, inspired by him every day. In addition, Stu Albert, another Yippie, is a friend and source of inspiration. Also, many Yippies consider radical satirical groups, such as Billionaires for Bush, to make use of the humorous approach to politics the Yippies popularized. The Yippies were truly one of a kind. They bridged the gap between hippies and the anti-war political movement, helped give media attention to the problems of the nation, and, most importantly, effectively stood up for their leftist ideas by using the media to their advantage. The effects of the Yippies can still be seen today. As Stu Albert points out, the Yippie philosophy has endured and evolved to fit the times and will continue to do so.